Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next session. I'm joined today by Graeme Keith and David Vose, and we're going to talk about how to measure risk managers' performance. So the performance of the risk management team. And I think when we say risk managers, we kind of imply that it could be a team effort. It's unlikely to be a single individual. But before I throw that question to Graeme and David, don't forget that this is a special one-day charity risk awareness event dedicated to collecting support for the victims of the Russia-Ukraine war. And there's a QR code on the screen that you see right now. You can scan it and donate to the World Vision International organization, or you can donate to any other charity that you feel like. There's absolutely no restrictions or limitations on that. So David, Graeme, thank you for joining me in this conversation. This session is live, so if you're watching this on the conference on the charity.riskawareness.com website, ask the questions underneath the video. There is a comment section. Don't ask it in chat because it's a technical support, and ask it in the comment section. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, or any other platform where we are broadcasting, you can just type in the questions and we'll see them all collectively in a single place. So by the way, if you're watching this, we know that 10 people at least are watching on YouTube, and we don't see the number that are watching on LinkedIn. And I know that 84 people are watching on the conference website at the moment. So say hello, type something in the comments, say where you're watching from, so we can at least see some interaction. So back to our topic of the day: how can an organization measure whether risk management is effective and adding value to the business? Who wants to go first? David?
I always want to go first. So first question to ask yourself is, I think, what's the risk manager meant to, or risk management meant to do? So as opposed to what the rest of the organization is, what's the risk manager meant to do? And I've always been of the opinion that the risk manager should be something of a corporate resource, an enabler of people to do better risk management. I mean, it always feel a bit weird when there's just one person who it's my job to do the risk management, for the whole company, because it's clearly not what actually happens. So I think they're part a coordinator, part an educator, an enabler, and then also their job should be to try and make sure people understand risk in similar ways, that there's some consistency, coherence in the way that they manage it, and that there is a general understanding of the corporate goals, what we're trying to do. Are we taking risks that really would derail the objectives of the business, and try to avoid that? So everybody's kind of basically just trying to get the sheep, and sheep, and not to save people as sheep, but kind of get everybody corralled and going in the same direction, and talking the same language. So I would say a first measurement of success of the risk management team is that when people come to meetings, they're able to talk about risk in the same sort of way, and they understand each other. And we should say opportunities as well. I mean, I hate to think of risk as being just operational risk, what could go wrong, but it's also that whole sort of balancing the good risks, or finding the good risks to take and avoiding the bad risks. The good risks being the ones that you take because there's lots of positive stuff that could come out of it. Yeah.
Okay, good start. Thanks, David. Graeme, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I mean, when you put the question, you kind of I mean, of course, it naturally appeals to the inner mathematician in me, or maybe not so inner, maybe it's also an outer mathematician. But you kind of sit there going, "Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, what is it we're doing? Measure what is it we can measure, and what is it we're trying to do as a risk manager?" And you start thinking about things like, okay, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the company. So, I mean, really, it's all, in the end of the day, it's in the performance of the company. If you're doing risk management well, the company's doing well. And okay, what does that mean? It's like, well, profits and making their targets, doing the, strategic alignment, all the rest of it. And I think you sort of want to get down into a little bit more, well, if you imagine the risk, maybe you might want to think of it as sort of keeping the volatility under control. And maybe you can sort of measure something in that. Or you can just measure the, returns and things like that. So, and you kind of think, yeah, okay, that would be nice to be able to do. First, I'm not absolutely sure that you necessarily want to keep volatility under control, because volatility can be upside. I mean, if things are going surprisingly well for you or exceptionally well for you, that's not something you want to contain or restrict. So what you're looking for is, you want to see evidence that the company has been exposed to some sort of high side. So they're taking risks, but they're taking risks in an intelligent way, managing the downside, but still having that sort of line of sight to the upside. And, you can do that. I mean, mathematically, you can do that. The problem is it's highly volatile. I mean, we are in the business of managing uncertainty. That's what risk is, and that's what we're doing. We're managing it. And what that means is that you end up in a situation where, you can have companies that are managing risk magnificently well. There's always risk. There's always uncertainty. They may be unlucky, so you have a company, you've changed their risk. You've gone from some horrible heat map thing to something wonderful and quantitative. And see, my finely tuned prejudices beginning to emerge there. And you say, okay, look, we're looking for the big improvement now, but then they just have a bad year, and you don't know that that was bad luck, or you don't know how that was related to the management processes. The other can also, I mean, we see companies that have horrible risk management processes, but just luck in and do well. So that volatility is difficult, and the way that we get rid of volatility mathematically is we look at lots and lots and lots of things together, and we try and sort of get that volatility to sort of go away a bit, so we can see what the trend is. That's fine, except that you need either a very big company doing lots and lots of transactions. You can certainly do this in a financial context where you have big portfolios and lots of transactions in them. Then you can actually do the math, and you can see how people are performing. That's great. But if you're a normal company, even a very big company, it's a lot of years then you're really seeing that. And so it's quite difficult, and it sounds like a fudge, and I feel bad saying it. I want to be able to do better in terms of actually putting numbers on risk management performance, but there is always that volatility component to it. So then you sort of shift it, and I think there's two ways to shift it. One is if you can achieve a general acceptance that your risk exposure is comparable, you save a lot of money. That's a very nice place to be. So that's really a way that we can imagine. We say, okay, how much are we saving? Not so much on the risk management department, how many people you're employing and how expensive they are and things. It's not so much that component of it. It's the how much are we spending on mitigations? How much are we spending on insurance? Insurance is a really nice one because that actually just puts the numbers there. So that's very easy to quantify. So those things, how much are we spending on mitigations? And I think if you can put it in a situation where you're saying, look, we've spent half the money on mitigations that we spent last year, but there's a general acceptance that our risk exposure is the same, then that's a huge win. So, I mean, I think really cost is where you can point at it. I mean, really what you want to be pointing at is return. It's the benefits. It's what you're reaping in. But actually, it's often easier to say, okay, let's keep the exposure the same, and let's talk about how much we're saving. And we can maybe later talk about a few examples of things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was somebody on the call who saved a lot of millions of dollars on insurance.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Wouldn't that be handy? Story, aren't you?
It would almost be like I teed that person up to tell that story.
Okay, so thank you, David, thank you, Graeme, for the nice segue. Because just like I guess everybody in the industry, if I were to be asked this question 5 or 6 years ago, I probably would have said how risk management reduces the uncertainty and improves the decision making, and just give kind of a more generic answer. But then now, for today, for the last 3 years, I've spent my whole department effort on moving away from hypothetical reduction of future uncertainty and then kind of waiting for this investment project for this plant to be built 3 years later to see whether it's been done on time, on budget, and so on. Because that was my traditional logic. You build the model, you forecast when the plant will be built or when an investment, an acquisition will be completed, and then 5, 7 years down the track, you measure how close you were to the reality. That was my kind of original answer. But then for the last 3 years, I've spent trying to find instances where the savings are almost immediate, where you spend a month on doing quantitative risk analysis, and then you take it to the market, and then the market prices your perception or your explanation of risk, and then you could say, well, okay, well, this actually saved the company a lot of money. If I was to answer that question, I would say that risk manager is effective if he saved 10 times more than the budget of the whole risk department, which is basically what we've done. And so I think I think there's there's a number of kind of time frames how you can measure risk management effectiveness, but reality is CFOs don't really care about the promises about the future, improved decision making, but they do certainly care that the cost of the department is basically free to the shareholders because you've paid for yourself. And that in my mind is a really good start. We have a question from Julian. It's sarcasm, obviously, but it's an important sarcasm because it just shows how system one thinking prevents people from understanding the important messages that we're saying. He's saying it's easy to save money on insurance, just don't purchase it anymore. That is literally the dumbest thing I have heard today, because your risk profile doesn't change regardless whether you purchase insurance or you don't purchase insurance, and your expected losses don't change whether you purchase insurance or you don't purchase insurance. You just transfer some of the costs of the tail risks to the insurance companies. So you don't save money on not buying. Actually, sorry, you probably could save money by not purchasing any insurance at all, but that saving would be very different because the saving is the difference between your expected losses and the premium price. And in the morning, I was hinting at how overpriced every insurance line was that I've observed. It wasn't even close to being fairly priced, even incorporating insurance administration costs, Solvency II requirements, and capital requirements, and everything else. It is still ridiculously overpriced. So yes, you would save the delta, but you wouldn't save a lot. So I wish life was that simple. And by the way, this is how CFOs think. Many CFOs think. They think, liability insurance. Why are we paying 2 million a year? Let's just stop it. 2 million savings. No, it's not 2 million savings. You now are basically self-insured this whole risk. And that risk could be less than 2 million, or it could be significantly more than 2 million, but you have to calculate it first. You can't just say not insuring, that's the saving. It's not one-to-one equation, unfortunately. David, Graeme, what are your thoughts on that?
I think insurance companies would find what you're thinking very unpopular. Please don't calculate your risks. Let us do that for you instead. And I know that when a lot of risk managers are risk and insurance purchasing managers, and I remember that time when we were at Firma a few years ago. Do you remember this? And this conference?
Yes, very well.
And every booth, every little social event, almost every single lecture was somehow one of the insurance companies
or a broker, which is even worse.
Exactly. Every little stall for exhibition was an insurance broker. And when I talked to risk managers about risk, and what do you do with probability, and it was like going into an alternative universe for me. They're going, oh, we don't really worry about that. The insurance companies take care of that for us. And I'm thinking, but I don't think that they're going to be very neutral in this. It behoves them to maybe just go, oh, that's very worrying. You really need to cover that risk. And all these brokers who are like coming out, I've thought of a really terrible scenario. You're going to need to cover yourself for that. It was always about the magnitude of the impact. And never about, well, is it actually even remotely possible? And nothing about what are we doing to prevent it either. There wasn't a sense of, well, we've got all these things in place, layers of, the Swiss cheese model, layers of controls, so it really ain't going to happen. So there was I hope no insurance companies, brokers.
They are, and I think they know what's coming. I now that I have free time, I will be publishing a lot more on insurance and brokerage and in general.
Looking forward to that, Alexi. I think people who buy insurance in companies have an awful lot of faith in market forces. So I think what they try to do is they say, look, I'm going to go to this insurance company. I'm going to go to this insurance company. I'm going to, ask for the same. I'm going to go to, a handful of insurance companies and ask for premiums on this thing that I want to have insured. And I'm going to let them know that they're competing. And I want the market forces to bring it down to what is an acceptable level. And we have a lot of faith in that. And actually, I mean, you say it's sarcastic, but in a lot of cases, when you look at it, it isn't the insurance isn't worth it for you. I mean, in a lot of cases, you're actually much better off self-insuring because this insurance is so incredibly expensive. So that's the first question is actually, do you need to insure this risk? Can you, and is it worth it? Is that insurance worth it? And then really what you understand, I mean, there's the whole sort of expected value piece, but it's not very interested in that space. What's interesting in that space is can you cope with the tail risk, and how much is your going to, cost of borrowing and things like that going to wrap up if you get hit with a very big, very big loss. So so there. I mean, I think that's a lovely example. It's just like there's an awful lot of stuff. So personally, as a private individual, I've started because I'm that kind of nerd, right? You start sitting there calculating things like people ask you when you hire a car, do you want insurance? And just going, well, how many times have I had a car and how many accidents I've had and what they cost? And you can sort of do it quite clearly back and you think about it and you look at how much is it costing? That much? No way. Absolutely no way.
Yep.
And it's a very, from us, coming from a sort of quantitative risk management point of view, it's an incredibly natural way to think. And it's a very easy thing to do to fold the insurance in. I mean, it's a flat cost, a yearly flat cost. And then you look at your loss curve with and without the insurance, and you can do that whole sort of, trading off of the risk and reward. What I find when I look at the way companies are doing insurance and talk to people about insurance is that they have some really weird practices. I mean, insurance makes sense when you can't afford the loss. That's when you need it. And for pretty much any other thing, it's not going to make sense. It's always going to cost you more than you need to. But then what people do is they limit the coverage. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. I mean, is that really what you want to be doing? So they sort of trade things off, but they trade things off in an incredibly irrational way. Or not irrational.
I have so many stories on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah, it was almost like I was teeing you up for this again, Alex. I'll kick it over to you in a second, but I just want to say one of the things about the quantification piece is that I actually think that just sitting down with someone and talking through how you quantify an uncertainty, where this is a risk. I mean, we're talking about insurance, so we're talking about loss event. So this is actually a risk. So this is a loss event. So when you talk about how you quantify those things and then how you fold insurance into it, we're just having that conversation, not even putting the data together, but just having the conversation brings such a clarity to what it is that you're trying to think, what that decision is based on, that there's an immense value in that, in just having the conversation. Of course, there's also a lot of value in gathering the data and seeing, and also understanding where the actuarial data differs from your own data and your own situation. So recognizing how you, as a small granular piece of category, differ from the large category that people are pricing their insurance on. Those things, and that they're all very important too. But just the conversation, what is it we're actually trying to achieve here? Why are we doing this? That on its own is immensely valuable. I'll punt it back to you,
Alex. I want to say one thing, and just because I'd like to get your opinion on this. Alexi, I was involved, I don't know, 10 something years ago in a court case. I was an expert witness, and I can't really say what it was about, but it was an absolutely massive claim. So like basically, the revenue of a whole business was insured. A whole big business, and it was the insurance premiums. It was all sort of divided up amongst a number of insurers and reinsurers. And insurance premiums were calculated on this simulation model that was built, which had no risks in it. So the assumption that everything was going to go really according to plan, it has little bits of deviation, all very complicated model with a GDP going up and down and inflation and thing. But I mean, it was to do with the aircraft industry. They didn't take into account things like 9/11. I mean, of course you couldn't at the time, but some similar kind of event.
Just some traffic risk, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't take into account changes in fuel prices, like that would make the fleet of aircraft not really very cost effective. And then the bit that I found really, really strange is that very tail end risk was taken by a few insurance companies, and they priced it at the expected value of the loss, which basically meant they just
That sounds like a good
money.
deal.
Yeah, it was. Of course, once the risk came up, then the insurance company going, "Oh no, we didn't like the model." But it wasn't a good model. But you signed off on the model and you did all the auditing on it. So my conclusion from that, which is really antithetic to what I would have imagined before, is that insurance companies are really good at doing these quantitative models. On an industry's sort of forecasting an industry exposure. And that experience, because there were a lot of these insurance companies all involved and they all looked at the model. So like 10, 12 insurance companies, is that they didn't seem to know anything about it. It would appear in hindsight, or they didn't care. So what do you think?
Yes, totally. Let me answer to that question first, and then we'll come back. And actually, we have a question from YouTube. Can you maybe try and paraphrase that question? The author, there's no name, so I can only relate to your nickname. The author, can you please paraphrase the question, because I'm not 100% certain what you mean, because I want us all to answer that question, but maybe just try and paraphrase it so it's a little bit clearer. So on the insurance, this morning there was, I usually kind of throw in this insurance mispricing the risk thing in every conversation, because I'm still kind of amazed, because when I was given the responsibility for insurance 2 years ago, I had a bet with one of my broker buddies, and I said, and this was a purely hypothetical. Like I knew him. I went to Ferma conferences. I knew what brokers were about and what insurance companies were about, and I felt they were clueless. So on just on the back of that sense, $1 million in insurance, like easy. And he bet with me. He had a bet with me saying like, no way. Maybe I could save a couple of $100,000, but no way I can save $1 million. It's physically impossible, because it's free market. Underwriters know their job. Brokers are serving clients' interest and all the usual, bullshit that they tell. And so when I ended up saving, I and my 3 team members who were responsible for insurance, we ended up saving 13 million. I just went like, this is unreal. Like, this is bizarre. And 13 million for us, it was like a 40% reduction in the total cost of the insurance for the, one of the largest fertilizer companies on the planet. It was a lot of money. It was ridiculous saving. And then that's why I said, like, we paid our salaries for like the next, 15 years. And it was so ridiculous that I couldn't believe just how bad the state of the industry really is, because and it's bad in kind of in every regard. I saw some of the underwriting models. So there's the broker, then there's the underwriter in the insurance company, and then there's the actuary sitting behind the underwriter. So I saw glimpses of the actuarial models that they use, and they're kindergarten. Like, it's embarrassing what kind of models they use for corporate lines. I hear they're pretty well at car and life insurances, like your I don't know what's the English word, the lines for the people, like the you sell to the population.
Yeah.
But the models that they've been using to insure chemical plants are just horrible. It's an embarrassment. Like, we've built better models in half an hour. And so that layer was weird. Then the second layer, the underwriters. I mean, I'm not even going to comment on just how clueless they are about risk. Daniel Kahneman wrote a whole chapter in his new book Noise. Second chapter is dedicated to how clueless underwriters are. Like, he actually done a study, and he tried to calculate what's the range of mispricing, and underwriters could double or triple the price for the same exact risk from the same exact company, just different people. It's so human bias driven. There's no science behind it at all. And I've spoken to many underwriters, like global underwriters, biggest underwriters on the planet, like the biggest reinsurance companies, and none of them have even they don't even have a sense of what the loss distribution looks like. They don't even understand the concept of expected losses, unexpected losses, and the tail. They don't know what VAR is. They don't know how to price. And so when I don't know who was it, you, Graeme, or David, who mentioned that the market should price the risk properly because there is supposedly competition. Last tender that we've done, the lowest bid was 720% above expected losses. And we would have expected 40%, 50%, maybe like a double, but 7 times the expected losses for a risk that does not have a fat tail. It was a life insurance policy, and I was just I was disgusted that this is so the market. They're all they're all in cahoots. They're not pricing the risks properly.
I think you can say that the market efficiencies come with things like the car and the boat insurance, the house insurance, the life insurance. I mean, I do some risk analysis modeling for these areas, and they're very easy. Because you've got so much data, you know what the expected frequency of accidents are for a particular group of people. You know what the loss distribution is, just empirically know it. And so you just calculate it all out, take the mean, add a bit, that's a premium. And everybody has basically the same information, the same populations.
They should.
There is a situation where insurance companies have real value in there, in that they're the collators of population data, and they can come up with good pricing. But it seems to me like if you go to an individual business, like a chemical manufacturer, fertilizer, whatever, they're not going to know anywhere near as much about the business as the business. So it sounds to me like it'd be much better to work with, like the brokers should work with the business to create the model that was assess and understand all the risks, and then price based on that.
I am as amazed as I think everybody else in the market is, because then the last layer is the brokers, who supposedly this agent that communicates between the corporate and the insurance companies. And imagine my surprise when I found out these are the guys that talk best practice risk management at every conference ever, except Risk Awareness Week, obviously. They're not allowed. They've I'm going to write an article about brokers, and I said the biggest trick the devil pulled is to convince that he doesn't exist, but the real biggest trick is the brokers convinced us that they understand risk management, and that somehow they have an authority on risk management. So the final layer, I was amazed that when I started asking questions, because I obviously to build a risk profile, I not only need my data, I have that, but I also need industry's data so I can adjust the tails, because just because we've never had a chemical plant explosion doesn't mean this risk doesn't exist. So we need the tail events. We need more points in the body of the distribution to properly fit it. And when I started going around the market globally, in Europe, in US, in Latin America, in Asia, asking brokers who have all this data to pull it together, consolidate, and share it in some sort of sensible form, literally one company in the world, and let me rephrase that, one European office of one global company was able to do that, while all the other offices of that same company couldn't do it, and all the other brokers could not do nothing even remotely close to it. Even though they have the data, they never. Can you imagine being a broker for for your whole life, and the industry being around for hundreds of years, and not realizing that building a loss distribution is actually useful? And so they don't collect the data, they don't clean it, they don't generalize it, they don't put it into any shape or form that can be reused. It just goes to waste. Every claim that you make, it goes to waste because nobody's ever reusing it. I just thought it was complete insanity. But let's quickly answer that question. So I again, kind of very in a very kind of marketing fashion, I said that risk management is effective if it can save the salaries of and the bonuses of the whole department for the 10 years. And the reasonable question comes back, well, can you save 10 years of salaries every year? I don't know, to be honest. I've only saved it once, and even for this year, I mean, the war changed everything, so it doesn't, it's not gonna work anymore for the company where I used to work. But the even before the war, in the first 2 months of the year, we already saved more than this year's salaries and bonuses for the whole department. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's you're probably not going to get 10-year savings every single year, but you can definitely save your this year's salaries and bonuses. I don't see.
It's a bit of a tricky question in the sense that once you've made the big savings, once you've started the process up and you've really understood, what insurance do you need, what insurance are you not paying for that you ought to be paying for, and got those questions settled out and saved the first 40%, then obviously you go into the next year in a much better position. So then it's quite hard to make that saving again. So the question is the saving relative to the last time you had a really good year, or is the saving relative to what you were doing before you brought in those processes? But I actually think the question was slightly different. The question was, how long does it take? How long does it take from when you start to when you realize that 10-year thing? And I think, Alex, your example there, it was immediate. I mean, it wasn't immediate. Obviously, you had to do the calculations, but it's in that first year. And I think that's, there are big wins. There's low hanging fruit. We're bringing in, moving over to some of these sort of more, what can we say, analytical approaches to risk management. I think also there are benefits that come in straight away. So if you're coming over and you're sort of, let's just call it what it is. And when we're going over to making quantitative assessments rather than qualitative assessments, when you do that, I think there are some huge advantages that come straight away. And the cost realization, insurance is a lovely example because you put money on. It's very, very clear where the cost is, but you can also be saving on mitigations. And in a sense, an awful lot of what we do to manage risk is a form of insurance. It might not be paying an insurance company. It might be just making some sort of investment to reduce the loss in the case of a risk taking place, but it's a form of insurance. Sometimes it's a bit less tangible because it's kind of hidden in other budgets. Insurance is nice because it all sits on the one budget that says this is what we pay to the insurance companies. But there's a comp. So I'm sure that the 40% that you saved in insurance, there was also a 40% corresponding saving on every other kind of risk mitigation that you're doing. So that's there and that's straight away. But I also think that one of the things I've experienced helping companies come over into these sort of paradigms is just the quality of the conversation. So, you get people coming back and saying, look, the hours of our lives that we have wasted sitting, discussing, is this a 4? Is this a 3? Oh, but we had this last year. It was really bad. That should be a 4. Oh, but normally it's like this. It should be a 3. I mean, it's just your life just ebbing away minute after minute in these utterly meaningless conversations, putting things into a tool that can't use them for anything anyway. And then you come in and just a very, very, very simple shift of emphasis. There's no extra data. There's no extra process. It's the same people having the same access to the same data, doing the same things, but just a much more coherent discussion. The change in quality, the discipline and the rigor around this discussion of individual assessments, that's a win that you get really, really quickly. And it's always surprises me how quickly people latch onto that and talk to the benefits of it. What's less obvious, I think, is that it also, when you sort of make that shift to the content, because of the ability to aggregate, proper ability to aggregate. We all know we can't aggregate heat maps like red and red, calculus of color. No one knows how that works, but we know how to aggregate risks. So quantitative assessments of risk. Because of that, that also drives a conversation about how we own and manage risk across an organization. And again, that's a huge win in terms of the clarity of the conversation, really understanding what it is to own a risk in an operational instance and what it is to own a risk functionally. And that makes an immense amount of sense in a quantitative framework. It doesn't make any sense at all in a qualitative framework. So I think that, the cost savings straight away, and of course, once you've reduced all the costs by 40%, it's a much bigger ask to do it again the following year. But in terms of that sort of improvement in the quality of the discussion, I think you see that remarkably quickly, and that's something that stays with you. David, I'm totally going to no, I'm not. I'm going to punt it back to you because you said something to me earlier today that I really, really liked about why quantitative risk management works.
Oh, yeah. A very simple test, which is that all the companies that I know that started doing quantitative risk management never stopped. They never went, oh, this is a waste of time. So,
yeah.
Empirically, and I often get asked, with CFOs. In fact, I have a meeting this afternoon where a risk manager is having to go to the CFO to say why we should be going quantitative and wants a few pointers. The truth is that, my experience as a consultant for 30 years in software development, we don't really get told all the horror stories of why they use quantitative risk analysis. Like, I've built models and things and helped people assess things, but we don't actually get the feedback because, especially the software, because they don't want to tell us about all the things that are going wrong, or the things that they're avoiding going wrong. But what I do know is that they just keep using the software. They keep, doing quantitative analysis. So it must have value for them, and the people, and obviously intelligent people doing it, and they're not cheap. So, there's got to be value in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that and that answer kind of really nicely leads us to the question that Andrew Harter asked on the conference website, and I've put it up. He's basically saying, insurance, and I think we've talked about insurance cost saving, kind of immediate cost saving, enough on that topic. It's a two-part question, but you can see it in the chat. And the question is, so if we, immediate cost saving, that's really nice. I think what we haven't touched yet, because the immediate saving, they're not only coming in the insurance space, immediate saving coming from reduced market volatility, FX hedging, so less write-offs on foreign exchange volatility, less write-offs on price volatility if it's a commodity product. Then, of course, there is reduction in bad debts. So, credit risk obviously is a big component of risk management as well. So all those savings, they're almost immediate, and there are a lot of them. And that kind of builds a pretty solid business case for proper quantitative risk management, and covers risk managers' salaries, especially that most risk managers are not that expensive for businesses. It covers salaries for foreseeable future. And then Andrew is asking, okay, so is there anything we can do for the longer term decisions, the investment projects, strategic decisions? I don't agree with the last part of the sentence where he's saying the business is only in the business of making strategic decisions. I mean, there are a lot of decisions that can be improved by risk management in any organization on the planet. But what are your thoughts on how can we show examples of the value of risk management in kind of more longer term strategic decisions, investments, M&As, construction projects? What's there? I have some thoughts on that, but let's start with you guys.
That there we are really getting into what I was talking about at the beginning about the difficulty with volatility, because you've both got the long time scale, but also you're talking about a small handful of things, so you're really exposed to that volatility. It's a bit of a cop out, and again, I'm not wild about having this as my sort of first answer to that, but I would say the quality of the conversation and the clarity and transparency of the decision making process. I think that is really where a lot of the value of this comes. And one other thing I'd say on this, and I think maybe this is This isn't so much for sort of a company that's maybe doing 1 or 2 long-term investments, but this is maybe a company that's doing a little bit like a company I used to work for, Maersk Oil, which had, used to make quite a few investments, not a vast amount. It wasn't a huge portfolio which you could sort of aggregate all the volatility away, but it's quite a few. And I think in a company like that, a lot of the value is also really understanding at an early stage, what do you need to know to make this decision? So there's also, once you have, again, that clarity, you're saying, okay, you've mapped out what's driving the value of this thing. How's that working? That's beautiful in itself, because that really sharpens the conversation around why you're doing the investment, what it is you're hoping to get out of it. What are the things that you have to keep an eye on to understand, whether it's going to work for you or not. And once you have that, you have a sense of, okay, I have these uncertainties, these risks, whatever. Let's call them uncertainties now, because this, we're investing, so we're looking for upside. So we have these uncertainties. These are driving this thing. I just don't know enough about this. I just don't know enough about this to be able to say this is going to work for me or not. So I know where I have to spend my time. So again, it's coming back to a cost saving. But I think what you can do is you can put your decision makers in a situation where they have much better data to make the decision on for much less work, because that whole sort of process and clarity and rigor and discipline around the way that you do the quantitative assessments is extremely good at making sure that your work goes into the right place.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly. I actually just wanted to quickly pick up on what David said. You never stop with the quantitative. I once had to stop, but only because the shareholder said our quantitative model wasn't good enough, wasn't quantitative enough. We used the 10-year bootstrapping with correlations and everything, and he said, too much relying on historical data, too much relying on historical volatilities and historical correlations. You can do better. He called it still voodoo magic. And so yeah, we have the shareholder, math genius. So it wasn't good. Something that is 10 levels above what everybody else is doing in the market wasn't good enough. So that also happens. It was the first one for me. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, if this is voodoo magic, you should see the heat maps.
Well, I also think that good risk management allows you to be a lot more efficient in how you in your investment process, for example. So, like if you're quite consistent and in the way that you make your excuse me, your early appraisals of investment opportunities, you can quite immediately go. So you're really consistent. You go over some period. You can say these are big sort of alarm bells ring. It's not even worth looking at that. And you pick those investment opportunities that have a mix and you're not really going quantitative. You're just like identifying where your weaknesses are, where your strengths are, relatively speaking, and you make the funneling process for the approval of investment. You make it more effective and more consistent. And I think so. Maybe we're not changing the volatility too much, but we're actually just helping increase the profitability of the venture. Excuse me. Yeah.
We have an interesting question. Well, a good question from Arthur. So I can share my example, because I had 3 KPIs that were linked to my bonus, and the biggest weight was cost saving. Basically, how much did the company save through better insurance, and credit risk management wasn't my responsibility, but they had the same KPI, and market risk management wasn't my responsibility, but they also had the same a similar KPI. And so how much the company saved, and then the second portion of KPIs was on time complete integration into processes. So we were changing procurement, we were changing how tenders were done, we were changing how vendors were selected, how vendors were accredited, building a risk model for the procurement department, and yeah, that's it. Basically, there were 2 sets of metrics, KPIs that we used: cost saving and timely integration into different business processes, so that would allow cost saving later. So less write-offs because of prepayments and non-deliveries, less bad debts, and so on. What are your guys' thoughts?
I the cost saving one, I think, is a little bit dangerous, to be honest, because I mean, what you don't want is people just, then we're into the sort of comment that we had earlier that we should just stop paying for insurance. I mean, one can always reduce costs, but you also have to demonstrate that you are controlling that tail. But
that is
totally,
sorry. That is a very, very important question, and because I take it for granted, I don't say it out loud. The KPI actually said reduction in tariff compared to previous year without reduction in the quality of cover or improvement and must have some sort of improvement in the quality of cover, because deductibles, we've actually all of these savings, none of them came from increased deductibles, because that's easy. It doesn't take a lot of brain. You just retain more risk, you pay less to the insurance company. That's not what we've been doing. We've actually, even though we did calculate and mathematically decided that at the, I remember the best conversation with the head trader was, we said, if we increase deductible to this level, there is a 78% probability that we will be better off during the next year. And he goes, okay, that sounds like good odds on the saving. We would save more on the premium that the risk that we would retain as a result of that higher premium. So and limits as well. We've actually, in every single renewal, we actually increased, sometimes doubled, sometimes tripled the limits, because again, the previous practice was keep the limits low. And I said I had a lot of stories. The funniest story was we were insuring up to a limit of an insurance company. So not the risk that we had, but what the insurance company was able to sell us. Because otherwise we would have had to reinsure or co-insure, which of course the practice that we used extensively ever since. But this is just how ridiculous some insurance programs are. You insure how much insurance company is willing to give you, not how much you need. So if a catastrophe happens, you get like 20% of that risk paid back instead of the actual. So this is just like, this was, to me, was absolutely criminal.
Now that's one of the practices that I've seen quite a bit, and which is a very obvious place, but it's the other way around. I mean, you're paying more for the premium there because you're looking for the bit. So there are both situations where companies pay for an awful lot of stuff that is either way too expensive relative to their sort of unique situation, especially companies that are sort of conscientious and doing things well. So they're being priced against a vast industry where maybe they're sitting on the 95th percentile of good practice in terms of safety and things like that, but they're paying for an industry. It's like if you're a careful 21-year-old male, you're in trouble when you're paying for car insurance, because you're paying way too much, because you're paying for what everyone else has done, and companies have that same sort of effect. So if you have a view on those exposures yourself, you can say, okay, look, maybe this isn't worth it. So there's that piece, but there's the other piece, which is these limitations, and then at that point, actually the premium doesn't get to be that much greater, but you have the coverage where you need the coverage, and that's the game. But back to the KPI. So I think great with totally great build on the cost front. Love that you are pushing the risk management thinking out into the other processes in the organization. I mean, that really is what it's all about, and it's just wonderful to hear about situations where that happens, because I think that's the win. I mean, risk management is running a company. It's what it's all about. I mean,
exactly.
So. I just wanted to get one earlier on. You were talking about, when before you've had the insurance epiphany and you wanted to save the 10 times the thing. And you're saying, look, we make predictions and then we see how good we are compared to the predictions. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, because I think, we are in the business of identifying, assessing, and analyzing uncertainties. So we cannot expect to be able to predict accurately. What we're trying to predict, and the basis of our decisions, isn't what's it going to be, it's what it could be. It's the range. So what you have there is you are making probabilistic predictions. You're making assessments about the likelihood that things happen and the range of things that could come out. And that makes that kind of assessment. So if you have a KPI based on your ability, your fundamental thing here is that you are making assessments that you're using to make decisions. So it's a very natural thing to say, well, let's look at those assessments. Are they any good? And the thing is, again, we run up a little bit against this thing that says, it's actually quite difficult to say that with any kind of certainty until you have quite a lot of data and you can aggregate away the volatility. But it can be done. And actually, it was not so much on the risk management side. It was actually an earlier incarnation that I had when we were working with assessments around investments. But what we were able to do there, we had enough of a portfolio that over a long enough period of time, we could actually sit there and assess the fidelity of our probabilistic predictions. It's something you have to be quite careful of. So if you sit there saying, well, I've added all these probabilities together and I predicted this number, that's my mean. And he's like, well, I'm actually way off my mean. You can't say that. You have to look at the variance, you have to look at where you are, and there are various ways of doing it. And it's a little bit sophisticated, but it can be done. And I think as long as you have enough granularity in the way that you're specifying those things, that would be a nice place to be. I've never seen it in a risk management department. I've never seen anyone get to the maturity where they're able to sort of bring the data of predictions relative to things that happen. But I think it's a nice sort of future perfect situation to think about.
And point out that people often think that you need an enormous amount of data to be able to sort of calibrate. Well, if you go to like these financial models, whether they very sophisticated Heston models or something, they need thousands of data points. They need like 10 years of data, historic data on a stock price to make a fit to their forecast for the next year, as if the last 10 years is going to look like the next year for some reason. But what we can do, so that aside, in risk management, if you're making all these quantitative predictions and you say, oh, there's a 10% chance of this risk happening, I've got all of them 10% chance, and I've got 50 of them 10% chance of it happening on average, we'd expect 5 of them to have happened. And you can do the same thing for how much it costs you, and you can very quickly, in fact, recalibrate yourself and go, well, we 50 risk, 10% chance, 5 should have happened, only 1 did. Looks like we're really overestimating how much the likelihood of these risks going, or underestimating how good our controls are, or whatever. And there's a little rule, a statistical rule, 1/√n number, which says that your uncertainty, the amount of uncertainty about what the world really looks like, it reduces by, so this spread reduces by 1/√root number of points you've got. And so what happens is that it goes, boom, first data point, second data point, third data point, and it goes, and it's the progress towards perfect knowledge. It's slower and slower. But the good thing about that, it means that with your first few bits of data collection, and I think that sort of goes back, Alexei, to what you were talking about brokers just collecting lost data. With the first few elements of points of data, you learn a lot. It's really worthwhile collecting those first few. You immediately get benefit, and you immediately know where you're over or under investing in controls, which is one area that I feel we focus a bit too much on insurance, maybe, or a lot on insurance. But that's one bottom line cost saving. But in manufacturing, for example, we're always looking at ways in which we can become more cost efficient. We can manufacturing things that are simpler, or we can change them more quickly, or whatever. And these are very visible. Like we're making a thing, like an engine, and we're finding cheaper and cheaper ways of making this engine, blah, blah, blah. Risk is a bit different because we're trying to stop something we're trying to stop us ever seeing it. So it's a more complicated exercise in spending money. If you think of companies like Tesla, who have achieved a great deal through very obvious ways, or very visible ways of saving costs, and that has given them enormous competitive advantage. Where there must be absolutely loads of costs out there that we're spending on trying to control the invisible risk, the thing that doesn't happen. This is not visible to us. So I'm sure that a bottom line cost saving, there must be a massive amount in things we're doing to try and prevent risks, not insurance, but try and prevent risks happening. So yeah, what do you think about that? Because I think that for the CFO is another bottom line. We can say, imagine how much money, do you know how much money you are wasting trying to manage risk. And of course they don't. But
The risk that is not worth managing
yeah,
most of the time. Yeah, there's lots, and it's it's a weird quest because I think you've touched on a very important point. What I've discovered is any process that I looked at in depth, like vendor accreditation, tender process, maintenance budgeting, um, investment decision making, construction of a new chemical plant. Every process that you look at in sufficient level of detail, you realize how ignorant the process is to uncertainty. It's basically most processes in the business are built in a deterministic world. It's just everything's linear. This happens, then this happens, and there's 100% correlation. Everything is happening like this and no other way. And maybe sometimes they do some sensitivity analysis at the end, or they run a couple of scenarios. But normally everything is very linear and deterministic. And so the kind of conclusion to me, and I think this is where I'm beginning to evolve. My immediate conclusion was we can improve any business process quality through risk management. So to me, that's a given. But what I've discovered, exactly as what you, David, is saying, that is not good enough for the CFO. He doesn't care about the quality of the process, because if you can improve the process that leads to saving, that leads to redistribution of resources, then that is a selling point. And I've just happened to discover those savings in insurance. I'm sure if I continue to kind of investigate the procurement, which was my second pet project, and if I continue to investigate the procurement process, I'm sure that I would discover that there are actual cost savings as well through better payment terms, less accounts payables, and less write-offs on bad debts, and so on. And I'm sure it's the same in maintenance. We just started modeling. We just started modeling the operational risk, the loss curve for the maintenance. But I haven't got to the stage where I can actually compare last year to our model to then make conclusions out of that. I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I'm almost certain that we would find huge savings there.
I've done a fair bit of this in different industry. I think Graeme probably is too. Where if a red flag is like with maintenance budgets, if you have a piece of equipment and you just say, we replace this every 10 years, like in electricity infrastructure or something, that, I mean, and that's just like a blanket statement. These transformers or whatever, we replace them every 10 years, or we do a general overhaul. That they haven't thought about the value of doing it early or doing it later. They haven't done this sort of reliability-based maintenance programs. And so that, like you said, deterministic world, it's for sure you're either putting yourself at big risk or you're throwing a lot of money away.
Yeah,
because you haven't thought about it. You just made that blanket statement.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, because I have that feeling, but I try not to say something unless I actually tried it and got the result. So maintenance was my next big thing, and I feel there's just so much mess out there.
I think there's a reason why we expect savings. I think the reason for that is that entirely not unreasonably at all. I mean, this isn't absolutely straightforward. I mean, we can make sort of very big improvements with small changes, but quantitative risk is not absolutely straightforward, and people generally haven't done it. And when you're building processes and you're putting a company together without an account of uncertainty, you have to be conservative on everything, because otherwise you get kicked and you die. And then industry practices get built up around that. And there's all people saying, oh, that person, they crashed on this. And it's like, oh dear, well, then we better, and you are very conservative. And there's an awful lot of overlap and an awful lot of redundancy. And we have to have some humility here. I mean, we have to appreciate why people are doing what they're doing and look at that and look at the value of some of what they've done. But at the same time, we can bring those tools to bear and start.
What is humility? What is humility?
I realized that wasn't. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No. I'm sorry. I just making a silly joke because you're actually saying a very, very important point.
Yeah, so you can bring those tools to bear, and we can start unpicking those, and we can start looking for those savings. And obviously, the humility means that we don't just sort of wholesale change everything on the first day. We take it one at a time, and we find the low hanging fruit, and that's the big saving in the first instance, and then it gets a little bit harder from year to year, and we have to be a little bit more careful.
The one, if I can add to this, the one very important point, and again, I've done this through the lens of insurance, because we have a dedicated department that is basically investigating those cost savings. They're called business improvement systems or something. Their whole objective is to find those savings, but it's not linked to the risk profile, and hence they actually face a risk of finding the savings, reducing the redundancies, because there are a lot of, especially like since the Soviet era, the redundancies are just ridiculous. Like the gas pipelines, there are like 10 coming one after another, and if one explodes, nothing happens. Like you lose like 15 minutes of switching to the second pipe, and so there's a lot of redundancy, and it doesn't take a lot. Well, I'm sure it's also difficult, but it's cutting down redundancies is not really what we're talking about, though, because what I've discovered is our step 0 is understand the nature of the risk that you are investigating, because you may well discover that redundancies are not sufficient, that whatever the current process is not enough, and you actually should be spending more money. So it's not really, and this is how we measure effective insurance. Like, for example, we may have not saved on the premiums, but we've actually doubled or tripled the limit. So we still added value by properly insuring the underlying risk, as opposed to just having a window dressing policy that has absolutely no value to the business. So there were instances where we actually came with a recommendation, for example, like building a new water treatment facility for environmental risks. We said, yes, it costs, I can't remember, 20 or 30 million dollars to build this facility, but you're actually mitigating a risk exposure of hundreds of millions. And, because we quantified that, and we've built a very fancy 24 branches decision tree with Monte Carlo sitting on top of it. So we've built the risk profile of the underlying risk, and then said, you're actually spending not enough, and you should be spending more to mitigate that risk. But more often than not, when you build the risk profile, you discover that you're actually spending way too much, and there is a cost saving. So I don't want to get our listeners to get an impression that it's like save cost at any cost. That is really not what we're talking about. We're saying the mitigation should match the risk profile.
Yeah,
but
spend the money
for
in
that
the
to
right
match,
place.
yeah, exactly. But you need to understand the nature of the risk profile first, and then you match it against the mitigation, and you say too much, not enough in the right places, and the whole other side of the conversation.
Well,
Any thoughts on that?
Plenty of other industries where you have that same sort of a redundancy or overly spending on one particular pathway, for example. You focus on it, and it's the brave person who will take away some kind of expensive control and go, we don't need that anymore because we've got all the others. It's like, what are you doing? Don't you want to be safe? There's lots of industries where if you dream up something, like, for example, in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, or in the animal import risk analysis world, so where animals are moved, or animal parts or whatever, moved from one country to another. For biosecurity, if you think of another control, you slap it in there, because you keep your country safe. But you're missing a whole bunch of other pathways, meanwhile, that are actually far more important. And you could be spending your resources in a much more effective way. So anyway, it's not just the Soviet era. It's all over the place.
Yeah, totally. And I think the underlying message in all of that is you can make judgments whether there is enough or not enough of something only after you understood the nature of the underlying risk profile. It's basically like build the loss exceedance curve first, and then you can make all sorts of important judgments on that. Is it too big? Is it not big enough? Are we mitigating cost effectively? Are we mitigating excessively? It kind of starts with understanding the nature of the risk profile. And how do we link it back to the original question? How do we measure risk managers' performance? So maybe one of the ways.
Didn't you just do that? I mean, if understanding the nature of the risks and the profile you have, the resultant profile, isn't that fundamentally what the risk manager should be about? Like, it's about understanding and communicating, like understanding the risks that we're taking and not being too surprised. You know,
I tend to agree. I think it's collecting the data and building the models that would describe the nature of the risks that the company is facing, and then those risk profiles. And it's not really a single risk profile, although you can eventually link everything to your cash flow model or your liquidity. But it's really understanding each of those important individual risks. Market risk specifically, credit risk specifically, operational risks, and then it kind of decomposes environmental risk specifically. Understanding each of those risk profiles, and so building the risk models and collecting the data and cleaning the data and backtesting the models to provide sufficient comfort to the decision makers so that everybody understands the risk profiles that the company is facing. That could be an indication of whether risk management is effective. Graeme, any thoughts on that?
No, I totally back that up. Of course, I think that then raises the question: well, how do you measure that? And I think people might be saying, "Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit woolly, right?" I mean, we're saying, "Yeah, we want it to be good decisions. We want people to have a happy, fluffy feeling about, the quality of the discussion and things like that." So I think you still have that question there, and I think we shouldn't be too complacent. I think we should try and find that, and we should try and understand and pick it apart and see, where are the things that we can manage, and we are going out there and saying, hey, look, our analytical what's the word prowess is improving things here, and I think in a sense we kind of have to stand by that as well. So I totally agree with all of that, and I say many times, and I've said many times, that actually an immense amount of the value of this comes from the improvement in the processes, the rigor, the clarity, the discipline around these things, not requiring a huge amount of effort. And I really like the second way you said it. You first said gather the data, build the models, and then afterwards you said build the models and gather the data. That's the key thing. Build the models first and gather the data, because then otherwise you just spend a whole bunch of time gathering data that is absolutely irrelevant to your model. So build the models, gather the data, but let's look at those models and let's see let's hold ourselves up against that standard and say, how good are we at those things, at the same time as we enjoy basking in the light of everyone saying how rigorous and clear and transparent our decisions are now.
You know what I've discovered here, and this is kind of the demand from the shareholders and the board members and the executives, was that, and maybe that's again, at least this is, if I was a CRO of the next company, this is the approach I would take in my first year. There are plenty of risks that have a time frame of a single year. For example, your market price volatility, your FX volatility, your credit risk, your operational overspent on maintenance, environmental risks, they all have a pretty short time frame. And you're actually able to, by building a model, and then you can actually backtest it within a year, you would be able to realize whether the model was good or not. How often does the price spike above your 95th, or whatever your confidence interval is? How often does your CVAR reflect the actual write-offs, and so on? So there are a lot of risks, and that's, if we looked at the corporation as a single distribution, there's the body risks, and then there's the tail risk, the explosions, the flooding, the catastrophes. And my hypothesis this year, maybe next year it will change, but my hypothesis this year is that there's so much value risk managers can do in the body of the distribution with just like those plain vanilla boring risks. There's so much money that can be saved on the plain vanilla boring risks that that's where probably 80% of the focus could be for the risk departments, because that's where they can set stop losses, limits. Like that's where they can control and show almost immediate value, because they're involved in credit limit decisions, then sales decisions. Like they actually involved in day-to-day decisions. And then of course there are the strategic kind of big ticket items, change in customer preferences, big catastrophes, wars, all of that changes completely. But for the tail risks, you need a very different risk management. And either, yeah, and so my thinking is that by building and sorting out the plain vanilla body of the distribution risks, you kind of earn enough respect and leverage to be allowed to participate in the long-term strategic decisions. Because I've tried it many times. You come to the head of strategy and you say, we can make any of your models stochastic, and there's a lot of pushback because you haven't really built that trust on being able, because it's for tomorrow's market risk, it's an easy mathematical equation. You can probably even get away for some of the commodities with normal distribution. But how do you forecast foreign exchange in 20 years? There's no simple math for that, and it's just open to interpretation. And so my thinking is that maybe we should start by sorting out and fixing the body of the distribution, the plain vanilla risks, and then that way we earn enough leverage to be allowed to kind of have a say in the long-term tail risks.
I think you can say that if you look at obviously the higher probability risks have lower impact, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But if we apply processes like risk and analytic processes to those kinds of risks, and we can get the feedback, then it doesn't guarantee for sure, but it does give a lot of reassurance that the same methodology applied to those more higher impact, more strategically leveled risk, less frequent, is going to apply. Like it's working here, and it will continue working the basic ideas into those very low likelihood but really critical risks, and that means that we get the credibility to learn the lessons from those kinds of analysis. It's been validated, I think.
Yeah, they are different beasts. The risk management in the bulk of the distribution relative to risk management in the tail, and they're different beasts for various reasons. The nature of the decisions are different. There's also this component, which is a little bit like what we were saying earlier about insurance. So generally, if you can afford a loss, then the insurance is probably not going to be worth it. If you can absorb a loss without hitting cost of capital and things like that, then it's probably not going to be worth doing it, because obviously that's where the insurance company is looking to make their money to cover their tail risks and also to cover their covariance risks. I mean, they have issues because things tend to happen in bulk rather than just one thing at a time. So our perspective as a company is just us, but their perspective as an insurance company is, all right, well, this thing's going wrong for them, and actually there's a fairly good chance it's going to go wrong for a lot of other people at the same time. So that's going to be pushing on the premium. So in that space, it's not generally that useful to insure yourself for things that you can absorb yourself, but really where you are looking to cover yourself is where things you can't absorb yourself. And it's a little bit the same on the when you're managing the mitigation yourself, when your insurance is some mitigation action that an investment that prevents or mitigates the consequences of a risk. And I think what you find there is that it's very often worth paying, and the decision there is not so much is it worth covering or not. It's really a sort of, is this actually moving the needle? And that's so a lot of the conversations are, is this additional thing actually giving us additional protection or not? And that's where a lot of that conversation goes on. So it has quite a different flavor. But absolutely right. I mean, it's actually all coming back down to the decisions, and you get, I often get when you sort of talk about sort of risk modeling in oil and gas, which is obviously somewhere I spent a long time doing risk modeling. And people say, "Oh well, how can you know whether a Macondo type of event is going to happen, and what's the probability of that, and do you have any credibility about that probability?" And actually, what you can do in that space is you can turn it around and say, "Okay, what's the decision I'm making?" And the decision you're making would be, are you making an additional investment to avoid this sort of thing happening in the future? And then you put the decision model together and you put your probability in, and probability says, yeah, it is. And then you ask yourself the question, all right, I'm really unsure about that probability. There's a lot of uncertainty about that because we don't have a lot of data on those kinds of events. What if it were 100 times smaller? Would it still be worth it?
Still be worth it, yeah.
Would it 1,000 times smaller? Would it still be worth it? Yeah. Would it be 10,000 times smaller? Would it be worth it? Then we're getting up to the margin. And that's the sensitivity of it, and that's the sort of thing that you can do in that space, is that you can bring that decision structure in there to filter. And what it means, and what you realize, is that actually you don't actually have that much sensitivity to those things. In the bulk, you do, because those things are a lot more marginal. They're pushing your margins a lot more, but in the bulk, you also have the data to support it, so it's fine. So once you get that component woven into the framework, then absolutely, start in the bulk and then use that credibility to bring you out into the tails.
Yeah, totally agree. Now let's try and repeat exactly the same thing with heat maps. How do you have those conversations with the heat map? Okay.
Heat maps are easy to understand, Alex. They're very good. They're a very good communication tool. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, that's the most common thing I hear.
It's just the thought of tail with a heat map. And then I just had a brilliant idea for the risk department Christmas lunch. We're going to pin the tail on the heat map, because that's kind of what the whole thing is.
Pin the tail on the heat map. Yeah, and if consultants were a little bit smarter, the big four, I mean the auditors, they would make the heat map square with the red going as a tail in indefinite direction. I mean, speaking of missed opportunities.
Yeah, that's a gap in the market, Alex. Risk matrix with a tail.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Any other questions? No, I think we've answered the last question already. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
See you in the next workshop.